Hi everybody, it's Rude and Crude. There we go. And. No, not rude and crude, rude and crude. Just a quick thing about finishing. A funny story. I used to, my parents loved, and my grandparents especially loved Benny Goodman. He had master of the one-liners. And he had this one-liner he liked to use. A man is not complete until he's married, then he's finished. So he liked to throw that one around. I used to have a similar expression in my shop. The easiest way to ruin a perfectly good woodworking project is to put a finish on it. My finishing technique was lousy. Okay, first thing I did was I got a quarter sheet pad sander, and I would push that pad sander onto the piece like this. I had no ventilation, no dust collection, so my eyes would be watering. I couldn't tell if it was sanded or not. Then what I would do is I'd go get the can of polyurethane you go get at the home center. And I get the first paintbrush that wasn't clotted up with paint, okay? And I would try to then apply the finish with that. And then I put ridges and drips and sags, and every single piece I finished was lousy. Until I met this guy named Dave Niffer, Knipfer.
His stuff is worse?
No, this is, no, it's actually miles ahead. Rude and crude finishing technique. Dave taught me this technique. It was online at woodworking.org, the Worldwide Woodworkers Association. One of the things he recommended, and before I go into the finish, he recommended that people make finishing samples. Now, just so you know what this is, when you buy your wood for your project, if you're going to do a multi-step process to finish, what you want to do is you want to get a piece of wood that you're going to put in your project. And then what you can do is you can mark out different sections. I separated mine with a saw curve because I didn't want anything that I put on to migrate into the next area. So really important. What you want to do is you want to be able to control where you put the liquids when you're finishing. I made up both of these boards. One is soft maple, one is cherry, and I have a red oak one on the table. I'm going to demonstrate with the red oak one, but I want you to show, I want to pass this around so you get an idea of what the different pieces, what the different steps look like and feel like. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to start off with your wood. Okay, there we go, right here. This is a piece of red oak. Now, one of the things you'll notice in box number 1, it is just off the planer. Now, you may have a really good planer and a really good joiner, and it may be tuned beautifully. One of the things you'll notice if you hold it up to a raking light is you'll see little scallops. As the blade hits, it chops little scallops out of the surface of the board. So when you look at it, there's a number of ridges on it. Now these ridges you don't want in there. Okay, this you see some people that build it looks really smooth coming off the planer, and if you look at it with flat light from the top, it looks like it's a perfect piece. But once you get that look to it off a raking light, you'll see that there's those divots there. You don't want those there. So what you've got to do is you've got to remove them. Now, some of the problems people have when they sand, and I've been guilty of all these. The first one is that people want to start too high of a grit. I believe that if I started at 120 grit when I sanded, it would be beautiful the whole way through. Well, all you're doing is making more work for yourself. Okay? That's all you're doing is making more work for yourself. Just like if you're sharpening a blade, well, you want to start with a coarse grit. You don't want to start with a really fine grit. You'll be there forever. So what I do is I actually get in a coarse sanding. And I'll do the random orbit sander at 80 grit. Okay? That's not too bad to start off with. But if I've got a piece that's got a lot of divots in it, or if I've, the joinery where I've got the dovetail sticking up proud, I'll actually even get to the point where I take a belt sander to it with an 80 grit belt. Now remember, there's a name for that tool. It's called the belt saw. If you leave it in one place long enough, it'll dig right through your project. So a light touch, okay? There's a light touch with that. But once you get that piece evened out and all these ridges are gone, then you'll end up at this point. This has actually been sanded to 150 grit. Now I go from 80 to 120 to 150. And what I want to do is spend the majority of my time at that 80 grit. So what I do is I scratch out all these imperfections and I get a nice even surface. And then you just refine the scratch pattern. Okay? This is one of the handiest tools to have. A random orbit sander. Again, my little quarter pad sander wasn't cutting it. Okay? So these are great because they don't leave the little swirl marks like you might get on a pad sander. If you have a piece of debris in there, you'll leave little pigtail marks on the board. That's not the only option you've got. For smoothing out a board, you can go with a scraper. This is a cabinet scraper, a number 80 Stanley. These things are everywhere. You go to a flea market, you go on eBay, you'll find these things everywhere. Yes, sir?
I used one on the top of that workbench.
Can you go wrong with it?
No.
It's one of my favorite tools in the shop because you can get a really nice smooth scrape surface, which is even better than 120, 150 grit. Another thing is if you really develop your skills, a smoothing plane does wonders. Actually make the surface like glass. So with a properly tuned, properly sharpened plane, you can do a lot of really good work. So you've got options when it comes to smoothing the top of your piece. You don't have to worry so much about is it the right way. Whatever works for you is what you'll use. So now we're at this point. The next thing that happens is you've got to start thinking about sealing the wood. This is bizarre because people think, well, you're going to start the finishing, right? You're going to put a seal coat on it. Well, I do like to put a little bit of a seal coat on the wood. This is the next step, and this is where the root and crude comes in. Because once you get it sanded, you don't have to worry about brushing off every little piece of dust. As a matter of fact, what you want to do is just leave it as it is, get the big stuff off, and then apply a coat of my favorite sealing agent, which is shellac. Now, you can buy shellac flakes. They're out there, and you can dissolve them in your alcohol, and you can do all the stuff like that. But you can also buy it over at the Home Improvement Center, right there on the shelf. This is de-waxed. Seal coat is de-waxed shellac. The natural shellac has wax in it. There's talk that if you put a finish on top of a wax shellac, it may fail. I've yet to see it happen. I've seen people use wax shellac and then follow it up. Not really that much of a problem, but I still go with the de-waxed, just to be on the safe side. This is about a 2-pound cut. So what happens is they take 2 pounds of shellac flakes and do a gallon of alcohol. Now that's nice if you're going to start finishing something, but for me, for a little thin seal coat, it's just too thick. So what I'll do is I'll take denatured alcohol, which is shellac solvent, and I'll mix it half and half. You're going to see a lot of these in a glass jar. Now, how do I know scientifically I've mixed it half and half? I take out this thing called a tape measure, and I measure the height of the bottle, and then halfway up I put a mark. That's the scientific method. And then what I do is I pour the seal coat in, and then I fill up the rest of it with the denatured alcohol. Now, one good thing about glass, and I always use glass, is that it's non-reactive. It's not going to melt, it's not going to deform, it's not going to do anything, it's not going to rust, it's non-reactive. So you put in your finishes, you seal them up, you're great. The downside is when you put the lid on, after you mix your solvent in or you mix your finish in there, it can stick. Okay, it may be difficult for you to open because the finish may dry in the threads of the glass. And seal the cap on. The easiest solution to prevent it from sticking on, Teflon plumber's tape. 2 winds around the threads of the glass, and you won't have problems with it sticking. Teflon, remember they put it in frying pans so it doesn't stick? The whole idea. I like it. So step 3 is where I apply the shellac. Now if you have the board in front of you, and you feel step 3, you'll feel it's kind of grainy. It's not really all that smooth. Okay? This is where the magic comes in. This is where you go, I can't believe that this actually works. My wife was actually doing some projects for me during the summer. She had the summer off. She's a school teacher. So she said, I'm bored. I want something to do. I said, well, you can finish my project for me. And I told her to put on the shellac. And she says, we're done. I said, no, we're not. Okay? We're not done yet. Because the key to this process is you want to start sanding the shellac off. Have I lost my mind? You just put it on, now you want to sand it off. Well, there's a couple of things that this does. First of all, the grit of the paper you want to use is 320 or 400. Okay? This is a really fine grit paper. It actually feels like typing paper when you touch it. It's not all that gritty at all. What happens when you put the shellac on the piece of wood is it does a couple of things. If you've ever used a grain raising dye, a water-based dye, the first instruction they tell you to do is wipe it down with some water and wait for the wood whiskers to rise up and then sand it again. With shellac, those whiskers rise up and then they freeze in place. They're stuck. So when you sand with the 400 grit, it slices them right off. Makes it nice and smooth. The other thing it does, and whoever has the cherry sample, one of the things that cherry is known for is blotching. Why does cherry blotch? The reason why is when you look at the cells of a tree, cells of wood, they go up from the ground all the way up to the tree, and they're hollow like straws, like soda straws. Okay? What you do is if you take a look at a tree that's blotch prone, like cherry or pine, and those grains kind of meander a little bit as they go up the tree. Now when Pete shows up with the wood miser, hi Pete, when Pete shows up with the wood miser, he's cutting a straight line through that tree. Those those cells that meander on the way up get sliced open on the side sometimes. So you wonder why cherry blotches is because that there's now that straw sucking in the finish or the stain or the dye or whatever you're using. So it gets blotchy. What happens with the shellac is it goes into those pores and it seals them. So when you start to sand, you're taking the shellac off the surface, but it's still down in those cells. So when you do apply a stain or a dye after that, it's not going to blotch. Okay? This system really works well because difficult woods, you scratch your head, how am I going to make this not blotch? It's really simple.
So okay. You're always, on the third one, you're always using the clear.
Yes, you're always using shellac.
Okay.
Now, you can I would recommend staying with it. Now, Dave Niffer, the guy who explained to me how this worked, he would sometimes use different colored shellac. Shellac comes in very, very light blonde shellac, all the way down to like garnet, really, really dark. It depends where it's harvested from. So for some woods, he would use garnet shellac to change the color. But whatever he used, he would always use just the shellac to rub on. And then he said you had the sandings with that 400 grit paper. You have the sand for a good long time. Don't sit there and just wipe it once. You really want to get a good sanding on it. And it leaves just that residue right there in the cells. It takes it all off the surface. The last step that I use, well actually this finish that I put on this, it's not the last step quite, is that box number 5 down here at the bottom. You see I held it upside down, so it's on the top, but actually this is on the bottom. Now, one of the things I've given up on is I've given up on brush-on finishes. I just given up on it. And I really don't have the inclination to go buy a really expensive HVLP system. I just don't want to do it. So what I've done is I've figured out a finish that people have recommended and Dave recommended. There's a couple things you want your finish to do. You want the finish to accentuate the character of the wood. You want to protect it. You want to make it so it flows evenly. So we've got 3 ingredients that we use. The first one is regular old polyurethane. Regular old polyurethane off the shelf at the Home Improvement Center. This is the fast drying version. Doesn't have to be, it could be the regular stuff, whatever you want to do. The next thing I do is I add boiled linseed oil. Now this is the stuff that really makes the grain pop. When you rub linseed oil on a project, you really see it accentuate the grain character. This is a really good thing to put on to really make it pop. The last thing is mineral spirits, paint them. What this does, or you can use turpentine if you're into that. It smells like
Turpentine.
South Carolina, driving on Route 95 with all the pine trees. It smells like that. But what happens is, this is a thinner. This thins the consistency of your finish down. So you can apply it with a very, very high-tech device known as a rag. Okay? Now, if you brush on good solvent finishes, you'll get a good solvent brush. Okay, those are expensive. You have to clean them, try to get all the residue out. When you're done with your rag, you drape it out someplace so it dries, so it doesn't wad up and overheat and then start to combust. Oil finishes will do that. You don't want to try it, unless it's, of course, in a controlled environment. But what you want to do is spread that rag out, let it dry until it's stiff, and then throw it in your regular trash. Okay? That's all the cleanup you need for your application system. It's very easy. And when you rub that finish on, you put on 1, 2, 3, 4 coats. It doesn't really matter. it really does, it's a nice soft to the touch finish, but it does have protection. Now, the different elements inside this do different things. Again, you can add more polyurethane if you want to get build a film quicker. Again, normally the recommendation is a third poly, a third boiled linseed oil, and a third thinner. I use a half of the polyurethane and then a quarter each of the boiled linseed oil and the boiled thinner. And again, I use a scientific method. It's been proven in universities and research centers for years. I take a ruler and I stick it against the side, and then I figure it out like in the quarters, and then I mark it, and then I just fill it up to the appropriate lines. Anybody ever make good seasoned salad dressing? You get the little bottle, you pour in the cup, the oil and vinegar, you shake it. Same thing. Real simple, okay? Don't worry about being accurate. This is good enough. Again, you just wipe it on with a rag. If I'm really feeling froggy and I want to really protect the surface or make it really soft to the touch, all I do is add some paste wax and I rub that out. And again, this is for projects that are going to get a lot of handling. Things like boxes, where people are going to be touching it a lot. It gives a little extra protection to the finish, a little more of a luster to the finish. For a tabletop, not necessarily. It might actually follow up with a coat of wipe-on polyurethane, which would just be the polyurethane and the thinner to help protect the surface and build up a coat that way on a tabletop. But for everything else, it's pretty much my standard finishing. Now when I look at these boards that I finish, the projects that I finish, I no longer cringe and wonder what I've done wrong. Actually, a lot of people, they want to touch it and they say, that's what it is. It's really good. It's fit for a king. Here, king. It's fit for a king. You know what I'm saying? So that's the kind of finishing method I use in my shop. It's been very effective. I've been using it now for about 7 years. Anybody have any questions on how it works?
If you're going to be doing some staining in
Yeah.
between there, what step, where does the stain go?
What I do is I'd wait until after I sanded down the shellac. That's box number 4 on the sample board. I want to make sure that I sealed those cells so I don't get blotchiness. Okay? Am I beeping? Somebody's beeping. I'm beeping. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that that's sealed. So if you do apply that stain or dye to it, it doesn't get blotchy on you. Another thing I do is I don't really like the stain wood, but there was a project they did. It was made with cherry, and there was a lot of sapwood mixed in with the heartwood. So what I did was I did stain that with gel stain after I went to this stage. And I wiped it on and waited for it to cure, made sure everything was good, and then I followed it up with the final finish and a coat of paste wax. That worked out pretty well. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
How do you use the sample board?
How do you use the sample board?
Right. You have your project over here and your sample board over
Yeah.
there.
What'll happen is, say you're gluing together the piece and you're thinking about your finish. You're not sure what you want to do. What you can do is, again, when you buy your lumber, you buy a little extra. You buy an extra board. And then what you can do is now what I did was I did this in different stages. So stage 1, stage 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you want to try 5 different finish regimens, you want to see what stain would look like versus a dye, you can do this. And just what you want to do is on the back, you can write what box number 1 is, box number 2 is. And then just, like I said, drill a hole and hang it in your shop someplace. And that way what you do is you pull it down and you say, okay, well, I want to use this type of finish. But again, if you're, I've seen a lot of people do reproductions of Windsor chairs, and they want to paint things, and they scrape the paint off and apply a different color on top of that. This is a perfect way to do that without committing it to your project. Because once you spend all that time building it, boring everything, joining everything, last thing you want to do is say, oops, I made a mistake. This is the way to experiment with finishes in a non-threatening, non-consequential way. The worst you can do is just turn it over and start over again on the backside. So again, you get a lot of opportunity to mess with it. It's not something we normally think of. Normally we're thinking of the joinery, we're thinking of how we're going to cut the pieces, how we're going to shape the pieces. But if you are, when you start thinking about your finish, this is really the best way. You can actually, the thing that amazes me most is normally I do it to the entire project, but I didn't notice how drastically it changed the appearance of the board at each step. And this piece of cherry just really demonstrates it. There's just a different hue, different shading to the board every time you look at it. So it's interesting to see which step you're on. Any other questions? I told you I was from New Jersey, and I can speak very quickly. And I wasn't kidding. Anybody else? Going once?
Is this going to be in the newsletter?
It's going to be in the newsletter. We also have somebody tape. Hi. We have somebody taping. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this edited together, and we're going to be able to put this on the website. So once we get this done, it'll be there, so you can click on it and watch the entirety. And you can go slow. You can slow it down, so I don't sound like I'm from New Jersey. Okay? You can speed it up, make it sound like I'm someplace to speak even faster. Anybody else? I see somebody smiling back there. You don't be smiling at me like that. Anybody else? Yes.
Everyone applies what they learned tonight, especially for the state fair. The judging there's a lot of it on the finish.
Mm-hmm. So again, I've got to confess, I'm one of the laziest finishers you'll ever meet. I didn't get involved in woodworking to sit there and start brushing stuff on the wood. I did it to cut, and to plane, and to use the router, I didn't go there to use the paintbrush. Okay?
Or the sandpaper.
Or the sandpaper. That's the other one. Ooh, the sandpaper. I want to get it done as fast as possible, but I want to have the best finish possible. If you had a chance to handle the board and you felt box 5, pretty good, huh? That's all you want. At the end of the day, you want a really nice finish on your piece so you can be proud of it. So people will say, ooh, that feels good. My wife touched when she was doing the finishing for a step stool that we built for my mom. She sanded it. She didn't believe she thought it was keeping her busy. But she sanded with the 400 grit and she touched it. She said, I can't believe how smooth it is. She touched the step that wasn't sanded and then the one that was. And it was just night and day the difference. So again, it's the kind of thing that makes your project where you want to touch it, where you want to put your hands on it. Because people like to do that with wood. They like to have the connection. Anybody else?
You can put the recipe on the website.
Oh, we'll put the recipe on the website. We certainly will. I'll write up the whole procedure and put it on the website as well. When we get the video up there too, we'll put it with that as well. Anybody else? Going once. Going twice. Fair warning. Sold. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Tom, for the good work. Hey, one more thing. If you guys